Ken Cook here, and thank you for tuning in to what I know you realize is another episode I'm having. Today is a little bit different because not only am I talking to the Dr. Mark Hyman, my friend and EWG board member, I'm actually speaking with him IRL, which means in real life. My producer put that descriptor in for me, so I'm sharing it with all of you as well. Dr. Mark Hyman and I met up in LA to talk about functional medicine and how it ties directly to the work we do here at EWG and that Mark is a big supporter of. Now, if the term functional medicine is new to you, like the term IRL, don't worry, we'll get into it. Let's jump right in. Dr. Mark Hyman, hi, welcome to Ken Cook is having another episode, but this is a good episode.
I'm actually a doctor, so I can help with people having another episode. I have drugs for that.
I'm prone to them. But I'm really excited because when we have episodes together, I always come away encouraged and inspired and full of hope, which I don't think everyone experiences going to the doctor, but I experience it with you. Thank you for joining the podcast. There are so many things about you that I could say by way of introduction. You've been a friend for a long time. I'm board member of EWG. I don't even know how long, 10 years, maybe more?
At least, yeah.
Maybe more, yeah. You've been active in public policy. You're a pioneer in functional medicine. You founded the Center for Functional Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic. You're the director of the Ultra Wellness Center. You're founder and chairman of your own 501c3, which is called the Food Fix Campaign. And we've been participating in that with you. So this is one of the rare doctors who talks about nutrition, probably like at intake. This is one of the rare doctors who talks about public policy, who doesn't draw a blank when I say farm bill, right? Who gets it all. I want you to tell me a little bit about your journey in medicine that got you to this pioneering approach called functional medicine, which I wish wasn't still so pioneering. I wish it was standard operating procedure, but we're getting there, right? We're getting there. But how did you come out of medical school where I'm guessing you had no nutrition courses? Right? Nothing.
No.
Right?
We learned about amino acids and fatty acids. And we didn't learn about all the deficiency diseases like marasmus and kwashiorkor, which they had in Africa, but I never saw them in New Jersey.
Yeah. Maybe some physiology that related to, nutritional functions, but not the whole practice of healing yourself functionally through nutrition. So what was the breakthrough for you that got you to that?
Oh, well, Mark? Ken, I don't know if you know this, but I have a rare condition. It's called ODD. I'm odd.
That was one of my early diagnoses. I didn't share it with you.
And I always was a little off. And even in college, I was studying biological agriculture and different health systems and healing systems from around the world. Looking at systems theory and cybernetics with Gregory Bateson and thinking about, grew my own food and understood organic agriculture.
And where was this?
At Cornell.
Cornell. Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of got into all this a long time ago. I lived with a guy who studied ruminants and fiber and the microbiome. They didn't call it back then, but he was a PhD student in nutrition at Cornell. And he gave me a book called Nutrition Against Disease, which blew my mind, which was written by Roger Williams, who basically came up with this notion of biochemical individuality. We now call it personalized medicine.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
Okay.
And he wrote a book about how food both causes and can be the cure for disease. And so I always sort of had this in my head. I was a yoga teacher before I was a doctor, so it wasn't it didn't take too much to get me to kind of think differently.
You were off on this path from the conventional, from the get-go, right?
From the get-go, yeah. And I kind of endured traditional medical school. I embraced it while I was there. I became an expert at it. I graduated the top 10 of my class. People thought I was weird because I would do yoga in the back of the class and when I in the mornings, but they kind of got over it when they saw my ranking in the class. And so I basically just swallowed it whole. And then I took what I knew, which was deep understanding of the human body, and began to sort of say, how do I kind of take this and not just practice traditional medicine where I'm medicating symptoms, but actually help people? And then something happened to me, which was, both a crisis and opportunity, which is I got mercury poisoning from living in China.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yep,
And that, mercury poisoning is an awful thing. And it was something that I didn't learn about in medical school. I went to doctor after doctor. I went to Harvard, Columbia. I had all these weird neuropathies and fasciculations, and my muscle enzymes were off the chart. My autoimmune markers were high. My liver function was elevated. My white count was low. I had rashes all over, sores on my tongue.
Oh my God. What was the source of the poisoning for you? Food?
Yeah. So, I was a doctor. I was sort of hired to run these medical clinics and start medical clinics in China.
Yeah.
And someone told me that it was really polluted there and I should get an air filter. But stupidly, every day when I cleaned it out, I just took it outside the window and I banged it and shook all the black soot out, and I would breathe it in. It would end up in my nose. I'd blow black snot out.
Oh.
And that was sort of over a year I did that. And
all from burning coal in China, probably.
Yeah, so 10 million, at that time, 10 million people in Beijing used raw coal to heat their homes. And the air was as thick, as pea soup.
Yeah.
You literally could not look across the street on a sunny day and see the other side of the street.
Wow. And so how did you discover that it was mercury poisoning?
Well, it took a long time. I basically was struggling with these symptoms, didn't know what was going on, went to doctor after doctor. They said, well, you have chronic fatigue syndrome. You're depressed. You're this, you're that. I'm like, no, something's going on. I'm not making this up. I'm a doctor. I know my body. I'm really tuned into it. I'm a yoga teacher. I understood nutrition. I was healthy. And something just was wrong. And so I ended up going to a functional medicine conference, my first functional medicine conference.
So who would have been there? Who would have been speaking or what?
I mean, Jeff Bland was there. Joe Pizzorno was there. Was a father of naturopathic medicine. Started Bastyr University. Yeah. There were a lot of characters. David Perlmutter. It was just a whole cast of characters. Leo Gallen, Sid Baker, all the old timers in functional medicine. And I was on a plane going there from Maui because I had to cook over from Honolulu. And I sat next to this guy who was a naturopath who lived in Maui. And he's like, wow, it sounds like you might have something going on. Maybe mercury, or you should check. So I checked, and I had extremely high levels in my hair. I did a challenge test in my urine, which is something most doctors don't do.
Right.
And I ended up having like a level that was like 187, which is, on a scale, normally if it's over 20, I get really concerned with my patients.
Yeah.
I could say in the last 10 years, I don't think I've seen one over 100.
Seen anyone like that, yeah.
So I was like one of the worst. And so I had to really learn functional medicine to re-engineer my way back to health. And it taught me a lot about the human body, what goes wrong, how to fix it. So everything goes wrong, right?
Yeah.
Mercury just screws up everything. So my gut was a mess. My brain was a mess.
Bad stuff.
I had tons of inflammation. I had mitochondrial dysfunction. So I got to learn about how our bodies work, and I've used that for the last 3 decades to treat, tens of thousands of patients from all sorts of chronic diseases that no one could figure out. And they're really sort of simple to know and figure out once you understand the map of functional medicine, which is looking at root causes both of disease and root causes of health.
Yeah. And so early on also, your sensitivity to the role of toxic substances in our lives, because one of the things about EWG that not everyone knows, unless you look at our board, so we have you, we have Boyana Weatherly, we have Harvey Karp, we have 3 MDs on our board, all of whom are acutely attuned to the importance of toxic chemicals and how it can mess us up. EWG has attracted, because of our work, a lot of people in the healthcare world who use our research. And I didn't know that for years.
Yeah, 100%.
How is it that in addition to not training physicians enough about nutrition, we also don't train them about toxic chemicals?
Not at all. Like, you basically learn about acute toxicity.
Yes.
And that's it. And you don't, if it's not acute, then we just ignore it as a phenomenon. But we're so ubiquitously exposed to these compounds that are literally everywhere in everything, that even if you are living, on a farm in Maui in the middle of nowhere, you're still going to be poisoned. They did a fat biopsy study of, they got fat from a breast reduction or from a pediculectomy, basically a tummy tuck or whatever they were doing, liposuction, and they would send it off to the lab. Like 100% of Americans have high dioxin and DDT and PCBs and all these toxic chemicals, pesticides, organic phosphates, and it's affecting our health in a tremendous way. And so, yes, food, I would say, is one of the drivers of our chronic disease epidemic, but right up there with it are environmental toxins. And it's something that most doctors don't understand how to diagnose or treat.
Yeah.
Whether it's obesity, cancers, maybe we talk about toxins as a role, autoimmune diseases and immunotoxicity, dementias, allergic disorders, digestive problems, all these things can be related to environmental toxins. There are ways to treat people.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a case in point. I mean,
Yeah.
I had to figure out a different approach.
Yeah. To me, it's been fascinating to see gradually more interest from medical professionals. But once you talk about any of these health outcomes, if anyone's skeptical in the medical profession, just look at the professional societies, look at the American Lung Association, look at the Society of Toxicology, some parts of it, look at the Endocrine Society, and they all have these powerful statements on their website. Endocrine Society in particular, they say some stuff that's maybe stronger than EWG sometimes says.
Yeah,
And
around
these are the
environmental toxins.
professionals. Yeah, that
No, but the science is there. There's no dispute
Yeah.
about the science. Where the breakdown is, Ken, is the translation of that science into some clinical approach to actually reduce
what do you do with it?
exposure
Yeah.
and to actually increase excretion and detoxification.
Yeah.
So I had to learn how to detoxify my body, how to upregulate my own detoxification systems. I don't know if you've heard about this, Ken, but there's an incredible work in Europe that often doesn't happen in the United States. So there's a lab there that does toxin testing, and they look at cellular toxins. And I recently did the test on myself. Now, I've been eating organic as much as possible. Of course, I eat out. I don't always have control of my food.
You can't control it all the time.
But I try to
Yeah,
live in
yeah.
a non-toxic
Same with me.
environment. And I just had all these toxins embedded in my cellular membranes. They check your cellular levels, and I had like formaldehyde and phthalates and triclosan, all these compounds. Some of them I never even heard of, and I've been using a protocol that helps to do that. So the science is there about how to fix these things and how to not just reduce our exposure, but to increase our health through reducing our body burden of toxins.
Try and reduce sort of the internal dose, as it were, of chemicals that are moving around in our bodies. You know, when I think about, so we just did a study where we found a chemical none of us had ever heard of in human blood. It was not a huge sample; it's a pilot study, but it's a chemical called chlormequat. I might have
heard of that. Maybe that was one of the things that's in my cell membranes.
It's a growth regulator that's used on ornamental plants, and now it's being used on oats in Canada, and it's used all over Europe, mostly on small grains, and it's used at the end of the season. So when they spray it, the grain heads are right there, so it gets in the food. The same week that our study came out showing that it, of the 90-some people we tested, it's in the blood of like 80+%, and it's just been approved recently. Then there was a study that same week about, 2,4-D showing up in pregnant women. And, after a point, you just wonder, is the government's business just approving polluting of our bodies? Is it just one after another? They never add up the chemicals. They never look at their combined impact.
I mean, the thing about drugs, you have to prove that it's safe and effective before it's released. Chemicals, you have to prove that they're guilty rather than safe. So they're out there on the marketplace when they cause a problem, which may take decades to discover.
Yeah, I mean, the PFAS is a great example, right? So per and polyfluoroalkyl chemicals, the forever chemicals, the Teflon chemicals, the Scotchgard chemicals. And EWG on the board, we've been working on it for 25 years, half a century. If you include the insider knowledge the companies had, and then the delay in doing something once we all knew, it's discouraging. And I think that's why I find the way you practice medicine is so important, because you're letting people know what things within their control or within their agency they can do to reduce exposures. And then, once you reduce exposure, sometimes these things just are eliminated from your body depending on the half-life. But also you have techniques to help people reduce what's in there already. So can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the body has a built-in system for cleaning itself, right?
Yeah.
We sweat and excrete toxins, we breathe, we pee, we poop.
Number two? Yeah,
right?
That's right. You can say number two on the show.
We have a whole system for it, but it's overloaded, and we never had to deal with the burden of toxins. So there's ways to upregulate it. And in each of these systems, you can sweat more through saunas. That's a great way to help excrete toxins. You can increase hydration, which helps elimination of toxins through the urine. You can increase your metabolic excretion of toxins through upregulating pathways in the liver that are involved in detoxification through certain foods. So foods are full of phytochemicals that have all these benefits. So, for example, the broccoli family, the brassicas or cruciferous vegetables,
Yeah.
they have glucosinolates and sulforaphane and many compounds that help upregulate glutathione, help detoxify the body. Glutathione is the main detoxifying compound that the body makes. And we get depleted in that. And when people have depletion of glutathione, they tend to be sicker. We see this pretty universally in the data. And low glutathione just means your body is trying to get rid of these toxins and can't. So we do a lot of things to boost glutathione and various pathways, including methylation, that help the body to get rid of these toxins. And we use foods like cruciferous vegetables, garlic and onions, spices, herbs, curcumin. All these help. Green tea are all helpful in detoxification. And then we'll use supplements to help boost that as well, including things like N-acetylcysteine, which we use in the emergency room when people have Tylenol overdose to save the liver from becoming completely nuked from Tylenol. We give them a supplement, essentially, because it's so powerful. Glutathione is so powerful. And when you take N-acetylcysteine and boost that, lipoic acid, you can take methylating vitamins, B12, folate, B6, zinc, selenium. So there's a lot of things in the nutritional world that help the body to excrete these toxins. And then lots of fiber. Fiber helps it kind of get out your colon. So when you excrete them from your liver through your body, you want to make sure they're heading on out the road. And if not, you're going to just reabsorb them. So making sure you're taking binders and things that help excrete the toxins after you mobilize them. There's a whole systematic process in functional medicine using, diet, lifestyle, supplements, exercise, saunas, lymphatic massage, hydration. All these things help to mobilize and circulate and metabolize and excrete these toxins.
And to me, what puts the function in functional medicine is in an example like that. And tell me if I've got this right. What you're talking about here is basic bodily functions with respect to these toxic substances that affect a whole range of chronic diseases. So someone's not coming in to say, hey, can you help me with my cancer?
No.
And you develop a regimen for that. No, this is a chronic prevention.
Right.
This is across the board. And if there's a tendency for your body to have one or the other chronic diseases or conditions, you're knocking the odds down across the board for all of those. That's the functional part, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we don't treat diseases, we create health.
So let me ask you a question. I know that nutrition is central to functional medicine and to your practice. What are the first things you talk about when a patient comes in and maybe has just a little bit of a gut?
I give them Ozempic.
Well, we're going to get to Ozempic, but how do you talk to people about nutrition in a way that doesn't just roll off and like a lot of nutritional advice? What makes it stick for people?
So when I see a patient, I use data to help them understand their biology. And so I don't just say, oh, lose weight or eat better. I go, look at what's happening inside. Your insulin levels are really high, something your doctor never checks, which we check on the Function Health panel. I say, let's look at your small lipid particles, which are a reflection of your ability to manage carbohydrates. So let's look at your nutritional levels, your vitamin D and omega-3 levels. Let's look at levels of toxins and see what's going on. So I get a really deep view of what's going on in their metabolic and nutritional and cardiovascular health that's related to what they're eating. And then they have insight. They go, geez, I didn't know. I didn't know I'm close to being a diabetic. I'm going to get myself together.
So it's kind of it's a data hook, and it's very personalized.
Very personalized,
Because nutritional advice always seems like someone's just spreading it over the population, but it's
very personal. Like, for example, I wrote a book called Eat Fat, Get Thin about saturated fat and dietary fat. And it was kind of a goofy title, but the idea is basically that most of us out there have poor metabolic health, meaning we have some degree of prediabetes. And it's about 93% of the population. And that's defined as having high cholesterol, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, having had a heart attack or stroke, or being overweight. Now, there's only 6.8% of Americans that don't fit that criteria. Some of that is toxins, but a lot of that's nutrition. And so people generally with that do way better on a higher fat diet, and even saturated fats can raise their beneficial biomarkers and lower the bad ones. So whereas for other people like me, I'm not like that genetically. So I actually have to be careful with the amount of saturated fats. For example, I had a woman who was struggling to lose weight. She had triglycerides of like 400. She had a total cholesterol of 300. Her HDL, which is a good cholesterol, was low, although good and bad is not the right way, but it's basically what people think of when they think of that. She was pre-diabetic, and I said, look, why don't you try a ketogenic diet? So I basically put her on saturated fat, butter, and coconut oil. Basically, it was 70% of her diet. Her cholesterol dropped like a stone to 200. Her triglycerides went down to under 100. Her HDL went up 30 points, which never happens. She lost 20 pounds.
Amazing.
Now, another guy came in, and he was a elite kind of athlete. He was like in his mid-50s. He biked like 50 miles a day. He was just like, he was an animal. He's like, I want to try a keto diet. I'm like, I don't know. Let's check, but try it, and we'll just measure and see what's going on. And we did it, and he did it. We checked his labs, and it was terrible. Like his cholesterol went through the roof, his LDL went through the roof.
Energy levels probably went down. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, maybe, but
Yeah.
his biomarkers just were a disaster. I mean, you've got to stop this.
Yeah.
So I'm more on like him. There's a phenomenon called lean mass hyperresponders, which means if you have like a lean body type like myself, if you eat a lot of saturated fat, it's going to have a bad effect on you.
Yeah.
Whereas people who are diabetic, for example, Sarah Hallberg, who sadly died, was a friend of mine, worked on a lot of research around ketogenic diets and diabetes, reversed 60% of cases of advanced diabetes with a ketogenic diet, and looked at over 20 cardiovascular biomarkers, and uniformly all of them got better eating all this, quote, terrible saturated fat. So it's really about individualizing and personalizing the approach. And that's really why I believe in testing and checking, why I co-founded Function Health. And it's such an important thing for people to have their own data, to look inside their bodies and understand what's going on.
You know, the parallels here with how we approach toxics in the environment are so important. For years and years, we looked at average exposures. The average person developed regulatory policies for that. So someone was going to be exposed to dramatically higher levels if they were at the end of the continuum where they say consumed more of the substance, like maybe swordfish that had a lot of mercury in it. If they loved swordfish, they were an outlier, and they weren't necessarily considered in the calculus of what the safe levels are for these toxic chemicals, and could be in food, could be in water. But toxicology now, when it's sophisticated, looks at that individual, looks at that 99th percentile for any given. What does it take to protect or advance the health of that small segment of the population? We should protect them.
Yeah, but the truth is, Ken, we now do genetic testing, and it's called SNP testing, which measures the genetic variations, not so much for mutations, but how is your body detoxifying? So for me, I have really bad genetics when it comes to detoxification. So my genes for making glutathione are my methylation genes are not great. So I need a lot of help, which is why when I was exposed to X amount of mercury, I got really sick, where someone else who maybe eats tuna sushi every day may be able to get rid of it.
Maybe,
Right?
Yeah.
So it really is individual. And I had to learn my own genetics in order to customize the approach. And we're gonna get there with everybody.
So amazing.
It's not that hard to do. And we're gonna be able to create customized, personalized recommendations for diet and even detoxification.
Yeah. Well, we need to drag your whole profession in this direction, Doc.
Working on it.
Yeah, I know.
Buckminster Fuller said, you don't try to change the system. You create a new one that makes the old one obsolete.
That's right.
And that's what we're doing with Function Health.
That's exactly.
They can come along when they want, but I ain't waiting.
That's right. It's like in agriculture, which we can jump to, rather than wrestling endlessly with all of the problems of conventional, look at new models of producing food that offer a better alternative economically, for the environment, for human health. We hope for farmers' incomes in rural areas. And I know you've been doing a tremendous amount of work on farm policy, a doctor who works on farm policy. So tell us.
How'd I get there?
I know, right? It's ODD.
Listen,
it's your ODD.
I know.
When
it was really occurred to me, functional medicine's all about going upstream to root causes. What's the cause of the cause of the cause of the cause of the cause? So what's the cause of diabetes? It's food.
Yeah.
Well, what's the cause of the food we have? Well, it's our food policies.
Yeah.
What causes our food policies? It's the food industry and ag industry. So really the problem starts with the soil.
Yeah.
Starts on the farm.
Yeah.
And all the way up the food chain. And by the time it gets to the patient, there's nothing I can do as a doctor to really cure diabetes in my office. It's cured on the farm. It's cured in the grocery store, in the restaurants, in the kitchen. That's where diabetes is cured.
Yeah.
And so as a doctor, I had to go think about this. And then as I began to dive into it, I began to understand the intersectionality between the health of the soil, the health of the plants, and the health of humans. It's one ecosystem. We're not separate.
Yeah.
And the soil is so critical because it allows the plants, if it's healthy soil with lots of organic matter and a healthy microbiome, which, by the way, is all destroyed with traditional agriculture.
Yeah.
That healthy microbiome helps the plant extract nutrients in a symbiotic relationship from the soil. And then those plants end up with not only more nutrients, but also more phytochemicals, which are incredibly beneficial. For example, the things I mentioned in broccoli that help detoxification of mercury. So we want more of those.
Yeah.
So we now know that the soil health is connected to plant health, is connected to human health. It's one plant. We are the earth is us. Ain't no way around that.
Absolutely.
So what we do to the planet, we do to ourselves. What we do to ourselves, we do to the planet. It's this complete cycle that we're in. And unless we actually understand that and change the very policies that are driving the wrong kind of agriculture, that's destroying the soil, that's polluting our waterways, that's spreading incredibly high amounts of toxic chemicals on our food, including glyphosate, which now is 70% of all crops, destroys our microbiome. It's transgenerational epigenetic effects we're seeing, like literally 3 generations or 4 generations down. We're seeing, if let's say a grand rat has great grand rat kids.
Yeah.
I don't know what do you call grand rats, but they have the influence of a toxic input to that grandmother rat.
Yeah.
All the way down to the great-great-grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right.
And you don't see the effects in the grandmother. You only see it in the offspring.
So we really have to start as doctors thinking about more of this. In fact, at the Functional Medicine Conference this year, we're going to be having a whole panel on the soil and plants and humans and talking about regenerative agriculture as a solution to a lot of our health crises.
Yeah. And a big part of this, and we've been working on this for a long time at EWG, is simply looking at our crazy investment portfolio as taxpayers in agriculture. What we're spending money on is producing the problems. We're spending way too much on commodity crops, producing them in surplus, so much so in the case of corn that then we have to burn it as ethanol. We're spending a huge amount of money on soybeans, cotton, and so forth, mostly to feed animals. And that money could be invested in much smarter farming systems, but we have to change the policy to make sure that happens. How do you approach that?
Yeah, that's what we're doing. I met with probably over 150 senators and congressmen and people in the executive branch and USDA and FDA and HHS, and we're really active in helping to educate the lawmakers because they just are uneducated about this for the most part. There's a few in there who really know, like Shelley Pingree and others, and Jim McGovern and Roger Marshall and
Cory Booker. Yeah,
there's a lot of really good people on both sides of the aisle who care about these issues. I met with senator from Arkansas who said, I know I see all the changes that happen in the farmland. I see what's going on. It has to stop, and we need to change.
Boozman,
from Arkansas.
Yeah.
And we had a great conversation.
Member, he's high ranking on the agriculture
right, exactly.
committee. He was the chairman for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
So we had a great conversation, and there really is beginning to be an understanding. And we're met with a congressman from Iowa, who's a Republican congressman who's got a PhD in agriculture, smart guy, and he understands this. And he says, yes, we have to change. The farmers are wanting to change. We have to change because it's existential for them. They want to keep their farms. They want to make money. They want to be able to grow the food. They don't want to be doing what they're doing. They can't make it work. And so they're really open and moving policies forward to support more regenerative agriculture and support these farmers.
The farmers are trapped by certain technologies and policies in a way that consumers are trapped by the food environment that surrounds them, right? They have to fight through that. It should be our job to develop policies and options to make it easier for them to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the private industry is doing this. There's private equity companies now that are buying land and funding farmers to convert from conventional to regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
And they're creating the bridge. So they're being the government, in a sense, creating crop insurance and giving them a backstop. And they're doing it because it's a huge profit center. Like, in other words, they're not doing it out of goodwill. They're doing it out of the economic argument that doing this is better for the farmers, it's better for the economy, it's better for the soil, it's better for us, for who eat the food. It's made that way. So it's a beautiful, virtuous cycle, as opposed to vicious spiral that we're in now.
Yeah, and that had to come from the outside. I mean, look, let's face it, the farm subsidy system dates from the Depression, and I don't mean 2010. I mean the great
33.
Right, 1933 Roosevelt, and so the interventions that were initiated then, that they've been modified a little bit, but they're basically unchanged, supporting the same kinds of systems. Obviously, they're not working because we have to keep these emergency funds flowing. So if we can shift some of that, and we've spent a fair amount of our effort at EWG over the years, move more of it to carbon smart farming, move more of it to supporting diverse smallholder agriculture, more on basic conservation measures instead of maximizing the production of these commodity crops that then are produced in such surplus that farmers go broke. It's not like it's working economically.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to learn more about this, I think they can watch films that talk about this, like Kiss the Ground and a new one called Common Ground. I'm in both of them, but they really talk about, and they show, not just talk about, show how this works at scale with large farmers who actually are doing far better, making more money, restoring the soil, conserving our scarce water resources, not using agrochemicals, producing as good or better yields, producing higher quality food that's more nutrient dense. They make more money. It's just like this wonderful vision. And it's not like it's an idea. There's many, many farmers around the country who are doing this successfully and have opted out of the traditional ag system.
Well, we need to reward them. I have to ask you about this contradiction. We have chemicals that we're exposed to that signal to our body in ways that add to the burden of obesity in the population and in individuals. And at the same time, we have drugs we're now using, like Ozempic, to try and deal with obesity. Tell me, how should we think about that? One set of chemicals that's making things worse, and one set of chemicals that's trying to undo the damage. What kind of world are we in here, Doc?
I mean, listen, Ken, obesity is complex, right? There's many
of course,
factors that cause it. And, I think food and ultra-processed food is probably the number one cause. A close second, I would say, are obesogens. And then the microbiome also plays a role, but that's more influenced by our diet. So it sort of goes with our diet, which creates a leaky gut, which creates inflammation, which makes you gain weight, which causes some resistance. It's just a whole vicious cycle. But the obesogen thing is really interesting because when I started looking at this, it was 20 plus years ago. And I wrote a book called Ultra Metabolism. And I had a chapter in there called Love Your Liver, right? In order to lose weight, you got to love your liver.
Yep.
And it was all about this concept of obesogens. Now, there was scanty data at the time, but I saw enough of it to go, and I saw
it was just emerging then.
I mean, I had a
early on,
who was like a fitness trainer, and she was just so careful about her diet, and she exercised all the time, and she was like doing workout classes all day, teaching, and she had 40 pounds on her that she could not lose. And I'm like, I don't know, well, maybe we should check toxin levels. So we did a Mercury challenge test, like the one I did. Her Mercury was very high, not quite as high as mine, but it was very high.
She ate a lot of fish, probably.
Yeah, ate fish
Thought
and
that was
fillings
healthy.
and right.
Yeah.
And we got the mercury out of her system, and boom, she lost 40 pounds. And so that kind of got me to see, oh wow, this is
you
not
must
just
have had so many
epiphanies. Yeah. So basically, I started looking at the data, and you can look at the data on whether it's heavy metals. Arsenic is a big driver of diabetes.
phthalates,
BPA, bisphenol A is really toxic, and it drives insulin resistance. And it's ubiquitous. BPA is in everything, and it drives insulin resistance. So these toxins are not just poisons in the sense that they're toxic to us, but they also have enormous effects on our metabolism. And they interrupt insulin functioning. They interrupt mitochondrial functioning, which is how we burn calories. So there's many mechanisms. They alter thyroid function.
Yeah.
So for example, many people, when they lose a lot of weight, they stop and they hit a plateau. Why do they hit the plateau? Well, what happens when you lose weight, you release all these stored toxins that are stored in fat because they're fat-soluble toxins. And then those toxins get released in the blood and they interrupt, for example, thyroid function. So we see reliably that thyroid function declines as you lose weight if you're very overweight, because the toxins are screwing up your thyroid function.
Yeah.
And the thyroid is the most sensitive to these environmental toxins. So, we see through many mechanisms, and I wrote an article called Systems Biology, Toxins and Obesity. I think you can Google it, it's online. I wrote it probably like
We'll
20
put
years.
it. We'll link to it in the
Systems
podcast.
Biology, Toxins, and Obesity, talking about this, and that was forever ago. And I just had my friend Robert Lustig on my podcast at Doctor's Pharmacy, and we were talking about this. And we're talking about
He's the guy who wrote the new article about with Jerry Heindel about this new model of looking at.
That's right. It was in Nature, right?
Yeah,
looking at obesogens.
Yeah.
And looking at, everybody's looking at the what is the cause of obesity? Well, it's multiple mechanisms.
Complex.
It's how much we eat. It's the quality of the food we eat. It's the hormonal effects of it. It's the
activity.
Toxins.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that we're starting to really begin to understand this. But again, nobody's talking about this when they talk about weight loss. They're talking about Ozempic as a quick fix. But I'm very concerned about it.
Are you concerned about it? I find it concerning just from a distance. But
listen, will I prescribe it occasionally to people who are really stuck, who are very overweight? Yes. But it's really carefully prescribed by me because it causes significant side effects. And the things that I worry about are following. One, when you lose the weight, you lose half of the weight at least as muscle. Muscle is where your metabolism is. It burns 7 times as many calories as fat. So when you lose muscle, you end up actually having a slower metabolism at the end.
Bad feedback loop.
Right. And then, so you need to eat less just to maintain the same weight.
Yeah.
Then you stop Ozempic and you gain 65% or more of the weight back if you stop it. So it's a lifelong drug. So when you gain the weight back, you gain back all as fat. So let's say you start at 250 and you drop 50 and you gain back 50, your metabolism is going to be far slower at the end of it all. The worst part is the long-term side effects. And we're starting to see these, Ken, because they haven't been out that long, these drugs.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see really concerning things like, for example, small bowel obstruction. What that means is your bowel just stops moving. And so you have an obstruction and you need either a nasogastric tube, and in the hospital, it's an emergency, or you need to have surgery. There's a 400% increase, 450, I think, percent increase in the risk of having bowel obstruction. Now, when we see an effect of 20%, 30%, so for example, Wegovy was a weight loss drug that's a version of Ozempic, was just approved for its cardiovascular benefits because it reduced cardiovascular risk by 20%, right? As a big effect.
Yeah.
We're talking here about a 450% effect. Pancreatitis, which is a life-threatening condition that destroys your pancreas, causing type 1 diabetes, preventing you from being able to digest your food, and could kill you. It's 900% increase in patients who take these drugs. So I'm very concerned about the long-term consequences of these. I think in the short term, they can be helpful, but you've got to eat tons of protein and you've got to hit the gym and pound the iron. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a bad trouble. So I do think they have a role, but they're also extremely expensive and they're not, they're not as safe as we think they are. And, I remember this article in the New England Journal I read years ago. It says, be sure to use new drugs as soon as they come on the market before the side effects develop.
Well, if there's one thing I take away from reading and talking to you about functional medicine, it's don't look for a silver bullet. Look for evidence. And sometimes you'll find that thread of evidence that has an outsized beneficial impact once you discover it about yourself and it's personalized. But this seems like the antithesis in a way of functional medicine, to prescribe something to deal with a set of circumstances that is functional to your health.
It's like having a diabetic who wants to eat cake all day and giving them hundreds of units of insulin. Like, that doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense to do that because it's actually harming them, even though their blood sugar is coming down. They actually did this study. They actually, not actually with feeding them cake and all this, but they looked at intensive insulin therapy and blood sugar lowering therapy in type 2 diabetics and type 1 diabetics. And they found that the more aggressive they were with these drugs that raise insulin, the higher the risk of death and heart attack. Why? Because these hormones are not safe in large amounts.
Yeah.
Our bodies need a little bit of these. When you have large amounts, you get into problems like insulin resistance and inflammation, and that drives heart disease and cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer's. So you've got to really deal with the cause.
Yeah, the root causes. What's the next big thing you're looking to take on? Is it the Farm Bill? We're sort of at a wrap-up phase. Is it some other piece of policy work? Is it some project you have going? Tell us what's the next
for
big
sure
thing.
The Food Fix campaign is going full force, and we're doing a lot of work in Washington around food as medicine and food policy and the Ag Bill and child-friendly labeling and all this. But I what I'm really excited about is this company that I co-founded, Function Health, which I mentioned, that it allows people access to over 110 biomarkers, twice a year testing, understand what's going on in their body, using all the evidence base from medical literature, It's informed by experts, gives you a readout of what's going on in your body, what to do about it, how to up-level your health, do self-care when you need medical care. And it's, it's going to democratize healthcare, and it's going to give people the ability to be the CEO of their own health and learn what's going on in their bodies rather than waiting until something bad happens. And we're picking up all sorts of things that we didn't even know, like 67% are nutritionally deficient. We're seeing large amounts of toxins that people didn't know they had. We're seeing levels of metabolic health that are disastrous, as we mentioned. So people are really using this information to change their life and change their health and change this transition from wellness to illness.
Well, at the beginning, I said this was going to be an episode, but a good one for me. And that's what always happens when I talk to you, Doc. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And we'll be following that company and the regimen that I hope more and more people will be trying out.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Doc. Dr. Mark Hyman, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank all of you out there for listening. If you want to learn more about Dr. Mark Hyman and functional medicine, head on over to functionhealth.com/Mark. You can find that link in our show notes, as well as additional links for a deeper dive into today's discussion. Make sure to follow our show on Instagram at Ken Cook's Podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about EWG, head on over to ewg.org or check out the EWG Instagram account at Environmental Working Group. Now, if you like this episode, send it to a friend who you think would like it too. Environmentalism is all about meeting people where they're at. And if you're listening to this, you probably know someone who might be interested in today's episode, but they just don't know it yet. My ask is that you send it to that person or as many people as you care to. Today's episode was produced by the team at Full Picture Productions, and our show's theme music is by Moby. Thanks again for listening.